Greetings and welcome. If you haven't heard of Spotify for podcasters, it's the easiest way to create and publish your podcast. It's free. That's right, it's free to download. It has built-in tools that will allow you to record and edit your podcast from your cell phone or any smart device. Spotify for podcasters also distributes your podcast on virtually any platform that streams podcasts, like Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple and Google Podcasts, and much more. You can even monetize your podcast with no minimum listeners. It's your one-stop app for podcasting. Remember, it's free. I'm your host, I'm your producer, I'm your Fire Medic CEO, LP, Larry Penton. We got a very special guest in our building today that's going to be talking about sex trafficking and her career and how she transitioned from that life and what she's doing as far as being an advocate for those that are trafficked and even more. Like, we got a bunch that we're going to talk about in this next hour. But before we get started, I got to give you all the disclaimer stuff because that's what we do. This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. Uncensored conversations. We say what it is what we say. We don't do fluff. That's what you do to pillows and shit. That's what you add to cappuccinos and stuff. That's all I'm saying, Sam. That's all I'm saying. I just gotta let people know that. So we do real talk. Like, if you gotta drop some F-bombs or whatever, because I want people to understand, like, this is adults talking to adults about adult shit, and we keep it real. We keep
Good.
it
I was
honest.
raised by
Keep it
sailors
real.
and I cuss way more often than I should.
Look,
Seriously.
don't make me start laughing because I'm trying to get through this intro. So
Okay.
hold on. So if you are triggered at any point during this podcast and we're recording it, Sammy's not on camera, but it's going to be available across all audio streams. I'm doing a video portion of this, so her screen is blacked out, but I got to do a missing person case, and I don't have a video or audio for it, but I want to show the missing person directory poster of this individual. And I'll have the link of this individual. Her name is Bridget RENEE Mitchell. Again, Bridget RENEE Mitchell. I'm going to talk about her case. I got the link from missingin.org. Missingin.org. I'll talk about that at the end of the podcast. However, getting back to what I said, if you are triggered at any point during this podcast, please call 911. If you don't have an immediate need, we got a bunch of resources that are going to be listed in the show notes like we do for every podcast interview. So trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, all of those hotlines and websites are listed. If you have substance abuse and or alcohol issue, we have Al-Anon for those that are supporting those individuals. We have Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. Those bits of information are listed also. If you have suicide issues, there's a new hotline. There's a 3-digit code like 911. It's 988. Again, 988. So, without further ado, I want to introduce my guest. Her name is Samantha Ryan. We just call her Sammy. She's from the Midwest, like your Fire Medic CEO brother, LP. And you can find her on Clubhouse because that's why I ran into her. She is a professional singer / songwriter and poet living in the Midwest. I'm going to have her talk more about herself. So I'm going to introduce her and give her the mic, and we're just going to jump right into it because, Sammy, here's what I always say. 75 to 80% of the podcast that we do is not me talking, it's the person that I'm interviewing. And because this is some heavy subject matter, I want you to educate, enlighten, advocate, and raise awareness for trafficking because that's what you do, and that's what I do, and that's what we're going to do today in this interview. So without further ado, I want to give you the mic, and I want you to tell us about Sammy, and we're just going to jump into your story.
Wow. Well, thank you for that intro. And thank you again for holding space for a topic that is so near and dear to my heart, not just as a victim, but as a survivor and a thriver. There's so much to talk about. I almost don't know where to begin. I guess I should start by correcting some of the misinformation that's out there about trafficking.
before you do that, because that's gonna be the meat
Okay.
and potatoes. We'll get into that in the second segment. I want you to tell us about who
Oh,
you are.
gotcha. Okay, sure. I have been a professional singer songwriter for a little over 20 years. That's my career in music is my life and my reason for being in my passion. But I found myself in a position when I was 35 where I was groomed by my abuser, and I was literally held down and forced to perform acts of a sexual nature against my will and against my consent with people that he had sold me to through the use of Facebook and Twitter. Yeah. Truth is stranger than fiction. You don't ever think that that is going to be your truth until you find yourself in it. There are so many red flags that I could have paid attention to, but no one took me aside and said, hey, this is this is wrong. If somebody does this, this is not right. And, bow out. And maybe if they had, it never would have happened. I mean, who's to say? So, one of the reasons I talk about my experience is to bring awareness to those red flags. So, people are literally aware of what grooming looks like and how it takes place, because they found that it follows a particular pattern almost every time. It's the breaking of a person's will. And that is a psychological pattern that groomers and traffickers have perfected to a science. And you're able to recognize these cues. The trick is believing that you're worthy enough to leave in the first place, and they will try and convince you that you're not. So with that said, where would you like me to start?
We're gonna start talking about misconceptions. We're gonna jump into red flags. We're gonna talk about therapy, advocacy, and then we'll wrap it up with singing. And I always call it the
Oh
shameless
gosh.
plug segment, where give you the mic and say, how can people reach you? What are you doing? What do you got coming down the
Sure.
pike? What's going on for future events,
Mhm.
dates, whatever you're doing, that part will be all for you to tell us about. And then we'll jump into the missing person segment. So again, trigger warning, conversations, real talk.
Okay.
Let's go. Let's start with
Uh,
misconceptions. What are misconceptions in relationship to
So I've
sex
found that the
trafficking?
most common misconception is that trafficking only happens to young children. The truth is, and the sad truth is, there is a market for flesh of any age in America. Um, it is about power. It's not about sex. And labor trafficking is something that exists as well. A lot of times it's used in tandem with sex trafficking. And sex trafficking is going to look different from victim to victim to victim. My truth is not necessarily going to be shared by somebody else because their experience could be vastly different. But the grooming, like I said, that psychological process of demeaning someone and breaking their willpower looks the same just about every single time. And that's incredible. Another misconception is that we're powerless to do anything about it. One of the greatest things you can do is create an atmosphere within your family where your children don't feel fear or shame by sharing what they're feeling with you. A lot of runaways are immediately targeted as trafficking victims because they're a very easy target to pick off. They're already in a very vulnerable state, right? So cut that pipeline off before it even starts. There are ways to circumvent this vastly huge issue that nobody is talking about. And one of the things I'm trying to do is bring awareness. And I imagine we'll talk about that later. And I'm excited to talk about that. I would really like to focus on not the trauma that I went through, but the healing of and the journey afterwards, and let people know that there's hope after.
Absolutely. We are solution based plan of action
Awesome.
podcast. I always say, and here's why. When people find out that I'm a first responder and they find out specifically I'm a fire medic,
Hmm.
which is a firefighter, paramedic, they want to know. I get the same questions. What's the worst things that you've seen? How many people have you dealt with that have
Mm,
died and all this stuff. They want to know
right.
the blood and guts. And I always say, I'm not going to give you the blood and guts, but I will talk about those
Hmm.
cases, making sure that I'm not giving out demographics, abiding by the HIPAA laws and all those things, because I'm still licensed as a medic, even though I
Mm.
retired in 2020. And so I don't give them the blood and guts. And when I'm talking to people, as well as when I'm doing my interviews, I say, I don't need to know all the specs of what happens. I don't need to know some of those things in great detail. You tell me what you want to share
Okay.
with the audience. You can be general or as specific as you want to about what
Sure.
happened to you. And if you don't want to talk about those things, but you want to just mention them like you did,
Yeah,
that's perfectly
I
fine.
want
I
people to
want that.
understand it's
If
not
you
that
want
I
to just,
don't want to talk about it. I
yeah,
am literally fighting a case against my abuser, and will be facing him in open court soon. So I'm under a gag order and I'm not allowed to speak about a lot of it.
no, I was getting ready to say that because so you always be reading my
That's
mind,
what I
Sam.
do.
Stop reading my mind. You know what? You've been talking to
I
Marcella too
know.
much. She didn't gave you some
Yeah.
tools and shit. All right, look, let me say this for all the listeners. Sammy has an open case that's being adjudicated
Hmm.
right now. Part of the reason she's not on camera is because of that. Part of the reason that she's not going to give a lot of information about what's going on with her is because her perpetrator is getting
Oh,
ready to
he's
face
facing him. Yeah,
charges. And
64
so,
years.
right,
So
right. So he's innocent until
it's
proven
important to
guilty,
say.
like
Sure.
everybody is in a court of law. And so I want to say it again. He's innocent until proven guilty in a
Sure.
court of law. Period.
That's, and
That's it.
on
Okay.
that note, after my abuse, I
Yeah.
had to decide to myself what was more important to me, justice or vengeance. And in the end, I chose justice because I don't want my soul to ever look as black and tarred and oily and slick as my abuser's is. And it took a while. That's what's happening.
No problem. Now, let's jump into the next thing. Do you have any other
I'm
misconceptions
trying
that you
to
want to
think.
highlight?
I want to highlight again that grooming can literally and does happen at any age. It just takes a vulnerable person, male or female, to be in a state where they are able to be dominated and controlled, right? And is different from person to person, but can happen at any age and at any part of your life cycle. It's important to remember that trafficking again can happen at any age. I was 35 when it happened to me.
So let's do this. I want to do a top
Okay.
five when it comes to misconceptions. Top
Okay.
five to top 10. I want you to give me the top five to top 10 misconceptions about
Okay.
trafficking. Go.
I want to bring attention to the fact that it's not only young children that are trafficked, that it can happen to any age. And it's also the second point is that it is despairingly more prevalent in communities with people of color. And that's important to remember for a number of reasons. There needs to be a
Tell us.
safety net in place, right? We need to get the word out about what self-love is and what these red flags are so that people are aware and can make informed decisions for themselves about their well-being. And that's not
Great.
happening in communities that are populated with people of color. And that's a travesty that is disgusting and absolutely needs to stop. The next misconception is that trafficking looks the same for everybody. It's absolutely not true. Everyone's truth is unique. And there are some people who genuinely believe that they chose that life because they've been groomed to believe that they were groomed and made to feel like they had no other option, and they blame themselves. And that's another travesty. That's horrible. But ultimately, the blame lies with the trafficker. Another misconception. Oftentimes, the traffickers are people who were trafficked themselves. So the safety net that needs to be in place needs to also be in place for the people perpetuating these crimes, because oftentimes they're victims themselves. And we see this happen all too often when talking about, cycles of violence and domestic violence and sexual abuse, right? It's the same with trafficking. Finally, and the point I really want to drive home is that the aftercare for trafficking is so, so important. Studies have shown that traditionally, women who finally leave their abusive situation receive about 3 months of mental health support after the fact. But that does nothing in the long term. It takes years of real work and steady work and a team of people to get you back to what your baseline was before that trauma happened.
I want to thank you so
Sure.
much for highlighting those things. Let's move on to
Mm.
red flags, because here's the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about during this hour. Red flags.
You know,
the mic
hindsight is
yours.
2020, right? So I approach this topic with caution because I find it very dangerous to talk about sometimes. You know, it's not my fault, and I understand that, but sometimes it's hard to reconcile the fact that these signs that are now so obvious to me were not so obvious then. So I tread lightly here. And if you find yourself recognizing these symptoms and these signs, please reach out and talk to someone who can help you, because you're in a vulnerable state at the very least and deserve to have space held for you to speak your truth and get the help that you need. So with that said, one of the very first things was that my abuser had my number the moment he saw me. He was able to look at me and say, hey, there is a girl who exudes self-confidence in one area, but is not self-confident in her looks and her overall attitude and demeanor. Like, this is a woman who is eager to please someone because she just wants to be loved. He was able to read that by looking at my face. That is an absolute truth. That is a fact, okay? That it started with love bombing. Graciously, love bombing is an act where someone will bomb you with affection and love and adoration, you know, sing your praises and just fawn all over you. And it doesn't make much sense, right? Because you're just getting to know somebody and you're like, but it feels good if you are not used to being loved, right? If you grew up in a situation where you were fighting to find love, like a lot of us were, that love bombing can be confused as actual feelings. And you shouldn't chide yourself for getting those confused, but it's important to note the difference, right? So it starts with love bombing. And then it moves on to very insidious methods. Like, my abuser started ostracizing me from my friends and family. And it was, like I said, very insidious. I wasn't allowed to use the cell phone for various reasons. I wasn't allowed to speak to my friends or talk to my family. And then he convinced my friends that I didn't want anything to do with them also. You know, he was working both angles. He was doing his best to make sure I was an island unto myself, because that is the most vulnerable position a person can be in when they have no support system at their ready, right? And then it moves on to acts of aggression. I remember the first time my abuser slapped me, and you know, it was open-handed like most of them start with, and I was so shocked. And he was so apologetic, but he also made sure to make me feel like I should have known better and I shouldn't have said what I said, and I should take note, and he was very sorry that he acted out like that and it wouldn't happen again. But ultimately it was my fault because I knew better than to say what I said, you know? And then it moves on to further acts of aggression. And in my case, I became aware of his he's a pedophile, and his method of selling me was an act of revenge for not being okay with his lifestyle, is ultimately what it came down to. Like, he felt betrayed by me for trying to tell people that this is not an okay person, that he was doing these acts and he should be stopped. And it went from bad to insane in a very short amount of time. I mean, I'm talking over the course of like a month and a half. And I know he had been planning it for a lot longer, but over that course of a month and a half, I literally feared for my life. To this day, and it's 3 years past when I left, I still don't sleep more than 3 or 4 hours a night at a time because I've trained myself not to sleep too long because I was convinced that he was going to kill me in my sleep. And I am actually still convinced that had I not left when I did, that that's absolutely what would have happened. And that's how quickly it can change. All of this took place over the course of 6 months.
When we talk
Well, a year, technically.
wow,
I lived
6
with the most abusive
technically.
part for half a year. But the journey from being a person I met through a friend to that most abusive person took 6 months. That's an insane short amount of time.
I want to send you some
Oh, I
healing
thank you for
energy
that. I
right
received
now.
that.
And I also want to tell you that your strength and your courage to not only share your story, but to come on a public platform, that's some superhero shit to me. I'm telling you, like,
I don't look at it like
and
superhero stuff. I mean, I appreciate you saying that, but I feel like it's my duty that if I'm able to hold space for other victims who can't speak out, then that's something I should absolutely do. And I'm okay with that, you know?
that's what superheroes do. They do stuff that regular people are not gonna do for whatever reason. That's what superheroes do. I'm gonna tell you this, like I always tell people, right across the hallway in my wife's office, because we both work from home. She bought me this plaque. It has the EMS logo on it, and it says, "All superheroes don't wear capes." People call me a superhero because I'm a first responder, because I've won clinical life saving awards and all this stuff or whatever. I'm like, I'm not a superhero. And when she brought me that, I said, damn, I look at it from a different point of view. So people like myself and people like you who have dealt with trauma, just like
Mhm.
me, I've dealt with trauma personally and
Man,
professionally as a fire medic, have done things to help raise awareness, to be an advocate, to save lives, whether it's verbally and or physically, whether it's interventions and all of these different things like that. And the work that you're doing, just like coming on this platform, just like having these conversations, just like facing your aggressor, just like seeking justice, just like helping those that might be in the life get out of that and do something different. And we're going to talk about some of the other things that you're doing outside of the trafficking work. That makes you a superhero
I
in my book. I'm
appreciate
not
that and
speaking
I
for anybody
received
else.
that.
I'm just speaking.
I don't see it that way. I just look at it like it's the right thing to do, you know? And I made the decision. This is the crazy thing. I know now, right, that I am a kinder, more compassionate, and better person having gone through this trauma. And now I'm seeing the other side of it, right, than I was before this happened. And I don't want to give my abuser any credit, right? It was the act of going through my healing journey and continuing on that's made me this better person. But I'm grateful
Mhm.
that I've had this experience and that I can hold space like this and bring awareness because I know I can handle it, right? Um, and that's
Absolutely.
just the way it is, you know? It's a conversation that never should have happened. There are no guidelines in place by the APA on how to correctly address and deal with PTSD survivors of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. There are no programs in place to teach mental health professionals how to correctly treat the PTSD that surrounds, the trauma of being sexually exploited and being trafficked. That's another travesty. Why isn't there a safety net in place? Why are we letting these people fall through the gaps? We are only showing them that maybe their abuser was right and they aren't worth the time and energy and effort to combat and save. And that's wrong. It is absolutely wrong. We need to change the narrative.
I want to talk about another
Hmm.
issue regarding trafficking in terms of training. When you look at first responders, what would you like for us to do and know? And let's start off with, what would you like for us to say when
First
we
of
show up
all,
on the
be
scene?
very, very aware that the person in front of you is probably not okay with being touched. And that's okay. That's their right. Be very aware of where your hands are. Make sure they're in front of you the entire time, so they can keep track of them, because we are hyper vigilant and hyper aware of where that next hit is coming from, especially in the aftermath after leaving that abuse, right? One of the best things you can tell us is validating us while also allowing us to know that in that moment we are safe. That is paramount to everything, that we made the right call.
That's important because I've done that in a domestic violence call, and I've talked about this before, where a woman, she had gotten cut on her left forearm really deep, really bad. Fortunately, it wasn't an arterial bleed, but it was down
Jeez.
to the muscle leg. And so we get there, she has a big white towel on her arm. The cops are there and everything, because we had to stage for a few moments before they cleared the scene, made sure it was safe. And so she didn't even want to go to the hospital initially. And so I was like, ma'am, I
Right.
can't take care of this here. You need bright lights and still. And so she finally agreed. We get her in the ambulance. We get her all patched up enough to get ready to go en route. And after the police officer got his report, well, let me backtrack. The first thing she said to me and my partner and the officer that was going to take the report was, he always hit me. I never thought
And
he
one
would
of the
make me
first
bleed.
things to remember is that one of the first agencies that let us down, those of us who were victimized by the cycle of human trafficking, is the medical agency, right? Because there are supposed to be people in place that notice these cycles of abuse and raise awareness to people who can help, right? And that was overlooked in my case in such egregious ways. I mean, I literally had to have a hysterectomy because of the abuse that I suffered. Surgeries, concussions, broken ribs, like things that obviously signify abuse, right? That any idiot could put together and say, clearly this woman is being abused. And no one took the time to do that for me. No one said,
when you look at these charts, these flyers that teach about human and sex trafficking, what's your opinion on
I
those?
I appreciate that people are trying to bring awareness, right? But I think they're getting the talking points all wrong. They take Ashton Kutcher, for example. He's doing amazing work and he's bringing awareness, but he's not talking about the bigger picture, the fact that it can happen at any age, the fact that it happens to communities populated with people of color more often than white communities. And that's not to say it doesn't happen to white communities, right? That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying it's so disproportionate, it's almost unbelievable. And that needs to be and should be immediately addressed before anything else, right? Let's talk about why this is happening. Let's figure this out and find a solution together that addresses every aspect.
This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, sponsored by Anchor, produced by Penton Pending Consulting Solutions LLC. If you want any help immediately and need any help immediately, we ask that you call 911. That's your first resource that starts the documentation process. That emergency medical dispatcher, which most people call 911 operator, has the training and the equipment and the access to get you police, fire, EMS, and maybe some other resources depending on where you live. Definitely call 911. If you don't have an immediate need, we have some resources listed in the show notes for every episode that we do that's streaming on all platforms. So in the show notes, we have hotlines and websites for domestic violence, trafficking, sexual assault. We have hotlines and phone numbers for Al-Anon, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Narcotics Anonymous. If you have suicidal issues, whether you or someone you know or someone you don't know but you know of, call 988. That's the new hotline set up. It is 988. It was established nationwide July 16th of this year. And again, we are sponsored by Anchor.
Powered by Riverside FM.
Real quick,
I want to
I'd
get
like to
into
address, if you find yourself listening to my truth and resonating with it and thinking to yourself, man, that sounds a lot like what I'm currently going through. Reach out. There are people who can help. Understand that most likely your abuser has put methods in place to watch your internet activity, to watch your phone activity, but there's ways around that. Okay. For instance, you can use incognito mode on Google and it won't save any of your search history, right? A lot of the websites that you go to, like RENEE, have an option for you to quickly jump out of that website should your abuser walk into the room. There's safety nets in place for you if you're scared to reach out.
And what I want us to do, and you and I will work on some of this stuff later outside of this interview, we're going to create a list of resources that I want to put on my website, which is penpending.com, where there will be a link on there because Mrs. LP is doing a blog and that's primarily focused on missing persons, but we're going to expand and add some more categories and stuff. And so I want people to understand that there are a ton of resources out there. You just have to know where to go. And we want to have all this in a concise, clear, ready to click on link for everybody that wants to get information.
Absolutely. One of the easiest things you can do is dial 211 on your phone and ask to be connected to domestic violence shelters, and they will have immediate and concise answers for you right then and there. They will put a safety plan in place to get you out of the situation you're in, and they can do it in a manner that is not going to alert your abuser that you've even left. And he will have no idea where you've gone, and you will be safe.
And that's 211.
Yes.
That's anywhere in the U.S. Okay. I want to talk about your move from being victimized to surviving and overcoming. So let's talk about how you sought therapy and sought help. Because I always tell people, seek help. So what was your path?
This is astounding. I am on disability for my PTSD. I don't mind telling people that. And I was actually granted disability my first go around applying because of all the evidence in the medical field about my abuse. That's how much they let me down. You know, there is so much evidence there that was overlooked that they granted me disability on my first application. That astounds me, but I guess that's beside the point. Find a mental health team that you trust, that you can be open and honest with, and listen to them. Okay, they typically have your best interests at heart. If you are worried about having to take medication, understand that more often than not, medication is a short-term fix. It literally allows your brain to start creating serotonin and dopamine levels on its own again, right? So you're not going to be on them forever. If you had diabetes, you take insulin, right? If your brain's not working the way it should, why wouldn't you take something to fix that in the interim? It's not forever. It's just right now. And that's okay.
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what happened when it comes to therapy. You may have heard me say this before. Mental health crisis is the world's oldest continuous pandemic.
Oh, no doubt.
It's been around since the beginning of mankind. Here are the barriers that I believe, and I can prove this, that people typically use to not seek help. The stigmas, the stereotypes, the taboos, the pain, the judgment, the trauma, all of those things, and then some,
absolutely,
keep people from seeking help. Everybody, and I always talk about negative seeds when I talk about this. So everybody wanted to jump in the open water until the movie Jaws came out, right?
I mean, yeah, maybe.
Right? So I because I try to make things, I try to make things simple and to the point. So it's the kids, keep it simple and straight. So everybody wanted to get in the open water until Jaws came out because that made people think, oh, everybody of open water has a shark waiting to just devour you as soon as you touch it. Now, same thing has
Mm,
happened when it comes to mental health. So let's use another movie reference.
sure.
The movie One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest. That movie was an Oscar-winning film, won for Best Picture, Actor, and Actress. The lead actress, Louise Fletcher, she won
Hmm.
for her role as Nurse Ratched. That's where that term came from. And it showed how mental health patients were being treated,
Hmm.
even though it was a lockdown facility, uh, criminally insane. It was showing
Do
how
you
people were actually
know
treated in
when
mental
I
health
was
facilities. They were put.
when I was taking? Oh, sure. Go ahead. Sorry.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. So I want people to understand this.
Yes.
They were being put in padded rooms. They were being put in straitjackets. They were being lobotomized. They were getting medication to the point where they were catatonic and shit. So when people think about going to get help, a movie like that pops into people's head because they're like, oh my God, I don't want to be lobotomized. I don't want to be put
Right.
in a straitjacket. I don't want to be put in a padded room. I don't want to be put on medication to the point where I look like I'm the walking
Right.
dead. I'm just not eating organs and brains and shit. So when I talk to people about seeking mental health, I say,
Well,
get that negative seed out of your head because
it,
it's about more than that. The medication,
that
like you
said,
said, is not long term. But if
there's
you need medication, take it.
okay.
There's more. There's hold on. There's more things than just sitting on the couch for
Right.
45 minutes and doing a Q&A. You got cognitive behavior.
Well, I will
You
talk
got
about EMDR
EMDR,
in
which
just
is
a second
phenomenal
too,
for
because it's
trauma.
not the
Right.
cure-all that people say it is.
Right.
There are
See,
flaws, fundamental, real flaws in the mental health field
sure,
that we should address immediately. Like, for instance, when I was first placed in a mental health facility,
sure.
I was given an antipsychotic because I was immediately not believed. Um, and it was called Risperidon. I'm
Okay.
sure you're familiar with it. And it was so humiliating to sit
Yes.
in front of this person, this doctor, no less,
Mhm.
and pour my heart out and tell him everything that happened and have him say, this woman is off her rocker and has clearly lost her mind, right? Now, 3 years later, it's come to light that
Mhm.
not only was I telling the truth, that the video evidence exists online, right? So I wasn't believed by
Right.
the very people that are supposed to be there and believe me in the first place. And that's a travesty. That's wrong.
Mhm.
That's disgusting. Um, with EMDR, and this happens in a lot of cases. EMDR caused me to disassociate. Um, I vomited all over my therapist's couch. And later that night, I went home and tried to kill myself because the pain of what I went through was right at the forefront of my mind. And I wasn't readily equipped with how to handle it. Um, so there is an argument to be made that
Okay.
things like EMDR or the new one, which I believe the acronym is ART therapy, uh, should be done in an in-house sitting, you know? And it's a legitimate argument.
Okay. Instead of yeah. The other thing I was going to add to that is I always tell people that just sitting on the couch for
No.
45 minutes does not work for people. I tell them there are a bevy and there's a spectrum of modalities
Hmm.
that you should look into, whether it's cognitive behavior, whether it's EMDR, even the non traditional modalities like getting into the metaphysics. So when I interviewed Marcella, that was one of the reasons why that interview, which is coming out in a couple of months, is going to be so powerful because she helps the clients that she serves that have been survivors of trafficking and domestic violence and sexually based offenses. You know how she helps them?
Oh man, not
Using
just that.
tarot and
These
crystals.
program that she has
And
created
so,
to heal your inner child. I can promise you, I would
yeah.
not have the capability to sit here and have this discussion with you without reliving my trauma if it weren't for this program that
Mhm.
I am a part of in this journey that she's taken me on. And I've used it in tandem with therapy and with
Right.
psychiatry, right? And she's a big believer that you should
Mhm.
absolutely do that, right? But I cannot
Absolutely.
recommend this program
Yep.
enough. And one of the things I want to do is raise awareness about what she's trying to do. Because, I mean, as fellow thrivers and survivors, one of the best things we can do is support one another in our endeavors to help, right?
Right.
So if seek Marcella
Yep.
out, ask her about the inner child healing that she does. I can't speak highly about it enough. I don't want to go into detail about what it entails, but I can tell you that it is simplistic and graceful and
Oh
done
no, you don't
with
have to, because
an attitude of
yeah,
kindness towards yourself that I've not seen in any of the therapies I've been in. It's beautiful. Oh,
yeah, you don't have to, because I did. I did. That's why I had her
yeah.
on the show. That's why I interview her. That's why I'm
Awesome.
saying that it's coming out in a couple of months. Uh, that interview, we're talking about that.
That's
I'm
brilliant.
going
That
to
makes
add
me
to
so
it
happy.
even more. It's not just those things. There's
Hmm.
other things like NLP, the
Hmm.
neuro linguistic
Yep.
program,
Bilateral
EFT,
stimulation, right?
tapping,
Um,
breath
yep.
work. Yeah, breath work. I've done those on my platform. I've done those actually. I've done a
Hmm.
tapping session on an interview in the Trigger One Talk. I've done a
Hmm.
breath work session on one of my interviews. I've done an NLP session in one of my interviews.
Mm.
I bring in people that do Reiki. We've talked about those things. We're interviewing a person who is doing like hypnotherapy and stuff. I talk about all these non-traditional modalities because I want people to know it's not about taking a pill. It's not about sitting on somebody's couch. There's so many things that you can put in, like you said before, create a therapeutic team to help you
Navigate your
deal
path,
with whatever
right?
trauma
Like,
that you have.
um,
So I
one of the
like those
things,
things. That's right.
if it's
Absolutely.
okay, I think this is a great segue into the nonprofit that I'm trying to get off the
Sure.
ground. It's called Illuminating the Path because the idea is that everyone's progress towards independence and freedom from that trauma and that prison of the mind is different, right? But we will be there to hold your hand through that journey, that you are not alone.
Mhm.
We want to,
Yep.
Marcella planted this seed in my mind and I ran with it. The goal ultimately is to create a safety net for survivors so that they have the resources available to them
Mhm.
to continue mental health therapies long after they've left their abuser. Because, like I said, the statistics show that ultimately it's about 3 months when really it's the long term that has the most effect, right? It's continued support, continued therapy, um, continued, um, uh, gosh, I've been a loss for words. I apologize. That like rarely happens. Um, but the continued
Right.
act of working on yourself through years of practice that gets you back to a baseline of who you were before this trauma was inflicted upon you. Nobody who's gone through the trauma of sexual exploitation and human trafficking should have to worry about how they're going to pay to receive the mental health support they desperately need in order to heal from this trauma that is not their fault. I believe that with all my heart. And I believe that this nonprofit
That's
has
right.
the ability to change lives and change the narrative. And the other thing I would like to funnel money towards is a program, a dedicated program that will teach mental health professionals how to adequately address the needs of human trafficked victims, because I have talked to therapists that just have no clue what to say, right? Because how, if you've not experienced it yourself, how do you address it, right? How do you even begin to talk about it?
Listen, right.
And there needs
You're
to be
right.
a safety net. I keep
Absolutely.
repeating that safety net is oh so important. And I want to create that because there's not one there as of yet. But I think together, that's what we could strive to do. We can make that a reality.
You know what I thought about, and we're going to be wrapping up in a couple minutes here. I thought about your path and, like you said,
Mhm.
illuminate the path. That's the name of your upcoming nonprofit. And we titled this podcast Illuminating the Path from Sex Trafficking to Singing.
Yes.
You are a professional singer
Yep.
songwriter.
Oh man, since I was 5,
How
but
long have you been
professionally for a
singing
little over 20
and
years.
writing? And you're doing some great work,
Yes.
even via Clubhouse, which is where we met. And I want people to understand how incredible and giving that you are. And I'm not going to mention the guy's name, but one of my little brothers, I would say, not blood brother, but he's like my little bro. You are sponsoring him in a
Yeah. And
contest.
it's my
It's
honor to
called
do
Bars of the
so.
Beat,
Like,
right?
yeah,
And
it's a
that's
privilege.
great.
I mean,
That's
sexual
so
and human trafficking aside, as a musician, right, who's lived that life, I feel like it's my duty to inspire and help the younger generation come up and navigate this world, to the best of their ability, right? Um,
that's right.
and if I can do that and make things easier, why wouldn't I? It's just the right thing to do.
I want you to tell us, we're doing our little shameless plug real
Um,
quick. How can people get
I
in
think
touch
I'm
with
the
you
only
via
Samantha Ryan
Clubhouse?
there. It's the same picture that you see on here. And I have a community on there called Midnight Artist Society. And yes, and it's just a bunch
Midnight.
of
Okay.
poets and songwriters who are insomniacs. We get together and hold space for each other and share. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And I would love for each of you to come and be in that moment with us, you know?
We're going to have a link on there about that. And what I want you to do is I want you to hang around because I want to talk about, before we
Sure.
wrap up, we always close with a missing person case. So this case involves a young woman. Her name is Bridget Renee Mitchell. And I'm reading this information from Mrs. LP, who's our missing person expert. Some of this information comes from the charlieproject.org, and some of this information is coming from missingin.org. Missingin.org. So, uh, Bridget Renee Mitchell, she was born July 24th in 1966 at the age at the time of her disappearance, she was 33 years old. Height and weight is 5'5" at 195 pounds. She has black hair, brown eyes, medium complexion. She's a black female. She has a surgical scar on her right arm, just above the elbow. She was last seen wearing a tan shirt, beige, knee high pants, and she has some missing teeth in the back and on the side of her mouth. And the details of her disappearance is Mitchell was last seen in her residence in Regatta Apartments in the vicinity of the 2100 block of Sandy Lane in Las Vegas. And I want to put her picture on the screen here for those that will be watching this on our YouTube and Spotify page. The YouTube page is Pending Consulting Solutions LLC. So again, she was last seen at a residence at the Regatta Apartments in the vicinity of the 2100 block of Sandy Lane in Las Vegas, Nevada on August 18, 1999. Neighbors saw her get into a blue Dodge or Toyota truck with a pool company logo on the side. It was driven by two males, one of whom was African American and the other Hispanic. She has never been heard from again. One of the men who was in the truck with her eventually returned to the area and said he didn't know Mitchell's whereabouts. He was questioned by the cops and cleared as a suspect in her case. Nathan Burkett lived at the same apartment complex as Mitchell, and they knew each other. Um, a photo of him is posted in this case summary. Burkett has an extensive criminal record, mostly for violent offenses. He pled guilty to manslaughter in the deaths of two women, one of whom was his mother. DNA links him to the murders of three more women, two from Las Vegas and one from LA. Burkett is awaiting trial for two of the murders. Prosecutors plan to seek the death penalty. It wasn't clear whether he was involved in Mitchell's case however, and he hasn't been named as a suspect. And finally, Mitchell left behind 6 kids. She lived with her brother at the time of her disappearance. He stated it wasn't unusual for her to drop out of sight for a few days at a time, but she has never been gone for a very long time. Her case was mistakenly closed in 2000, but reopened after the cops realized she was still missing. Her case remains unsolved. I'm going to post a link from missingin.org that has the picture that I'm showing on the screen with her demographics and some of the information that I have read to you all. Again, if you have any information about her whereabouts, I want you to contact the Charlie Project. You can contact the Las Vegas Metro Police Department at 702-229-2907. Again, if you have any information about her whereabouts, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, contact the Las Vegas Metro Police Department at 702-229-2907. I want to thank you, Sammy, for being on the Trigger Wanna Talk podcast. We're going to be leaving. I'm your host, LP. And in closing, live in awareness. Don't live in fear. Keep your head on the swivel. And always remember, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or whatever, you can always send us an email. It's triggerwarningtalkpodcast@gmail.com. For Samantha Ryan,
Love and
again,
light to
Larry
all of you.
Kenton,
Thank you.
peace and blessings be upon you forevermore.